everyone, welcome to today's class. The topic of today's class is a brief history of environmental change. These are the brief outlines of today's class. So first I'm going to discuss about economic development. I'm going to give you the long-term perspective of economic development. That will be followed by a discussion on usage of environmental resources and again the long-term trend of the environmental resources. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about the environmental changes and the impact on the economy, human health and ecology. And at the last part of the discussion, I'm going to focus on the developing countries and developed countries, how these two sets of countries are actually contributing in overall environmental degradation and what is the impact of this environmental degradation on these two sets of countries. So let us focus on the learning outcomes. First, once you are done with this lecture, you will have an idea about the long-term perspective of economic development. You will have an idea about that rising trend of usage of the fossil fuel and how that has contributed to rising concentration of atmospheric carbon dioxide and what is the impact on the ecology and human health. You will have an idea about that too, and towards the end you will have an idea about how this dichotomy in developing countries and developed countries are taking places, where developed countries are contributing more in terms of carbon dioxide, but the impact on human health and ecology is severe for the developing countries. Okay, let us focus on this schema first. On the top side, it is written economic growth leads to carbon dioxide emissions. So as we move along, we'll see that economic growth is actually generating enough carbon dioxide emissions. What is happening if there is enough amount of carbon dioxide emissions? So rising carbon dioxide emissions is actually leading to this concept called climate change. And what is that? We are going to discuss in greater detail. And once there is a condition of climate change that is imposing ecological and economic impact, that has some harmful impact on ecology as well as economy, and if there are changes or if there are harmful impact on economy and ecology, so we need to have policies to address the issues of climate change. So this is a brief summary of what we are going to cover in the entire lecture. Moving on, so first I'm going to talk about the economic development. So this graph actually shows the global population, and as you can see the global population, so it's a very long term graph. As you can see, global population is started, level of population is started rising for obvious reason. So it is rising, right? So if there is increasing level of global population, we can understand, so economic activities will also rise. This graph again, it shows world GDP over the last 2 millennia. As you can see, for the first, let's say 1500, it was very stagnant and it was almost like close to zero, but it started rising, and 2015 onwards it like shot up like anything. GDP per capita, as you can see on this graph, that this presents the GDP per capita, and the time period is 1950 to 2018. What is the trend? This is a recent GDP per capita data. As you can see that world GDP per capita, it's increasing since 1950 onwards. Now the question is, why are we looking at all these indicators? That will be clear in a moment. Here I'm assuming that you have a basic understanding of how do we conceptualize development. You can go back and little bit revise your previous lessons, but here let me just give you a brief idea. So we know more developed countries are which countries? Those who are having high level of GDP per capita, and the countries which are having less amount of or lower level of GDP per capita, they are the less developed country, right? And per capita GDP growth, how do we calculate per capita GDP growth? It's nothing but GDP growth divided by population growth. So what do we understand? That if per capita GDP growth is rising for a particular country, that means GDP growth is rising at a faster rate than the population growth. So that's how we conceptualize the idea of development. Now in this particular graph, you can see here we are not looking at the world anymore. We are looking at various countries. For instance, Britain, Japan, Italy, China and India. I'm sure you can understand from the graph that the blue line, which is level of GDP per capita of Britain. The level of GDP per capita of Britain is quite high, right? Compared to, focus on the black line, that is India. So that level of GDP per capita of India is quite low compared to Britain and the other countries. This is, the time period is again from 1000 to 2000, right? So by just looking at this picture, we can understand that Britain is a relatively richer country, or we can call it as a developed country, right, based on this particular indicator. And India is a developing country because their level of GDP per capita is quite low compared to the other countries. This graph is relatively newer graph. As you can see, the data point goes till 2018. Here also you can see that each and every country, even if there are differences in terms of their level of per capita GDP, but each and every country had witnessed some amount of growth, right? It's a kind of a hockey stick, right? So each countries have witnessed increasing their per capita GDP at some point of time. The point of time may not coincide. It might be different for India or different for United Kingdom, but it is for sure that over the period, all the countries in this world have experienced some amount of increasing GDP growth and per capita GDP growth rate. Now the question comes, we know that in any kind of economic activity, we use environment, right? We use lot of resources from environment, and if you remember from the earlier lessons where we have already discussed how environment and this economic activity, they are very much intertwined. So at this point of time, I am going to ask you this question: how have the increasing economic activities used environmental resources? What would be your understanding on that? Just reflect on it and we'll get back to you. So let me give you the example of fossil fuel. So if you look at the Industrial Revolution, or if you take any reading on Industrial Revolution, you will have an idea that how fossil fuels played a very significant role in Industrial Revolution. And what do you understand by the fossil fuels? Fossil fuels are nothing but coal, oil, gas. So these are the sources of energy. So fossil fuels actually played a significant role in technological, social, economic development progress. So, and it has been happening since, let's say, since industrialization. Fossil fuels are important, but if you are burning fossil fuels, that had some impact too. So if you are burning coal, if you are burning oil and gas, we also generate carbon dioxide, okay? And carbon dioxide are one of the component which is actually driving this global climate change, and excess amount of emission of carbon dioxide also result in a situation of air pollution. This we are going to discuss in the later slides. Now focus on this graph. This is global fossil fuel consumption. Again, we are presenting a long-term trend. This data is from 1800 to 2021. As you can see, before around 1900, the level was quite low. So as you can see, since 1950 onwards, the usage of fossil fuels have increased over the time. Now the question is, what is happening? If the usage is increasing, then what is happening? So here I am going to talk about atmospheric carbon dioxide. As I have already mentioned, so if you are burning fossil fuels, if you are basically generating carbon dioxide. And what is the importance of carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide actually helps to retain the temperature. Okay, so the point is, if you are emitting excess amount of carbon dioxide, so there is a chance the planet is getting heated up more. Now focus on this graph. So this is global atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration. As you can see, it has a trend of fluctuation, but 2023 onwards, if you focus on this part of the graph, it's rising. It's like a steep, right? There is no fluctuation anymore. It is increasing. Otherwise, the earlier part of the graph, it showed a fluctuating trend. But why this is happening? This will be clear in this graph. So atmospheric carbon dioxide is basically rising because fossil fuel burnings. So global carbon emissions actually increasing because we are burning more and more fossil fuels. So if you are, let's say, setting up any factories, or if you are like driving your car, if you are taking flights to go to any other places, so basically you are generating a lot of carbon dioxide. Next graph, we are looking at global carbon dioxide emissions from aviation. So we know that we are now live in a globalized time, like we can go to any place on this earth like in a very small time, right? How can we go there? Because we take flights, and if you are taking flights, you are actually generating lot of carbon dioxide. Actually you are burning lot of fossil fuels, and that is generating lot of carbon dioxide. Just focus on this graph. It is like rising, increasing at a very high rate. Also, there are inequalities in carbon dioxide emissions from air travel. If you focus on the upper part of this particular graph, you will see that high income countries, actually they're contributing around 62% of carbon dioxide emissions from air travel, whereas lower middle income or low income countries, they're in like poorest half of the world, they're emitting around 10% of carbon dioxide from passenger air travel. So it's just not about factories. So if you are going by a flight, you have to be very careful about it. Similarly, global carbon dioxide emissions from commercial aviation also, but it is this picture is showing that, but actually passenger flights, this is actually contributing more in carbon dioxide emissions. As you can see that 80% of aviation emissions is coming from passenger flights, whereas for freight it's coming only around 19% of emissions. Okay. Another important factor is this ozone layer. So while we are generating or while we are burning fossil fuels, we are also generating certain substances which is actually affecting this ozone layer. Now the question is how this ozone layer is important. Ozone layer is actually observing the UV rays from the sun, and if the UV rays are directly coming to the earth or it's directly affecting our health, we might get lot of skin cancer if you are actually facing lot of sun rays, and if the ozone layer is totally like not functioning properly. This graph is actually showing how ozone depleting substances are, how it had increased till mid 1980s, but then again it gone down. Why it had gone down, it will be clearer in a moment when we'll be talking about various types of policies. But just focus till this point. There in this particular graph, we are seeing that there was a time point when ozone substances or ozone depleting substances emission was actually quite high. Now at this point, the next question or next discussion will be taking up. But the question I am going to ask here, what is the impact of this fossil fuel burnings or rising carbon dioxide on human health and on the economy? So what is the impact? So impacts are very severe. Let us focus on the first one. So on the left hand side of this slide, you can see the global warming. So what is global warming? It's like, this is just recorded the monthly temperature. You can see the monthly temperature is at world level. So you can see that monthly temperature is increasing, though there is a lot of fluctuations, but let's say since 1960 till 2023 we have the data, there is a clear trend of increasing global monthly temperature, and this is not a joke actually. Also, there are a lot of researches are taking place this time around this phenomena called global warming. So it is showing that a rising share of people are actually exposed to dangerously high temperature. Okay, this is because of the rising temperature. The next graph, we are seeing its global sea level. You can see again this graph is since 1880 to 2020. What is the trend? The trend shows there is a clear increasing global sea level trend is being observed through this graph. That means global sea level is also increasing. Now, another important point is air pollution. I'm sure like most of us are aware about this term called air pollution. Again, fossil fuel burning is actually generating this air pollution, because we have already discussed that if you are burning coal, burning gas, burning oil, you are generating basically carbon dioxide, and they are actually contributing in local air pollution. So you don't have to think about in terms of global what is happening at the global level. Just think if there is any factory nearby your home, and if they are like burning the fossil fuels, or if like your cars are running on the street. So basically what is happening, they are generating carbon dioxide and they are contributing in the air quality and creating air pollution. So outdoor air pollution is one of the world's largest health and environmental problems. Okay. So industrialized countries are really facing this problem. Those who are already industrialized, or those who are developing, or they're having their industries, are already facing this problem. And the global burden of disease study estimates that this is the number 4506193 deaths were attributed to outdoor air pollution. Okay. So what is the impact? I mean, should you be worried about air pollution? Yes. If you are exposed to air pollution for a longer period of time, then you might also have some problem in the cognitive functions, right? So human health is directly affected by the air pollution. Other than that, if you are getting exposed to these air pollutants over the time, then there is a possibility that you might develop this respiratory disease, cardiovascular disease, or cancers. So air pollution is directly affecting human health, and this is not a good news. Okay. So also death is quite high because of air pollution. So WHO has given a specific amount of air pollutant which is okay for human health. But this graph shows that share of population exposed to air pollution above WHO targets. So WHO gave some target around 10 mg per mq, but this graph is showing that most of the like higher percentage of world population is actually exposed to higher amount of air pollutant. So this is very worrisome trend. Well, there are various studies which have talked about that how many people have died each year due to the air pollution. So WHO studies shows that 7 million people have died because of this air pollution. So death source is air pollution, nothing else. So there are other studies other than WHO. So all the studies are actually confirming this point, that if there is air pollution for a prolonged period of time, that would directly impact the human health, and that would also cause death. So death from air pollution is quite high. This is another important factor, deforestation. Well, this may not be directly connected with the carbon dioxide, fossil fuels burning, but if you are increasing your economic activities, you are expanding your economy, or if you are like have a higher share of population, so you need land, so sometimes you also encroach into forest land. So that is called deforestation. So if you are like losing your forest cover, so deforestation rate is quite high. Here you can see Brazil is having 33.12%. So this is the share of tropical deforestation from commodity production. So you are just losing your forest because you are producing commodity. Brazil is very important because we know this rainforest, it is located in Brazil. If you are losing this amount of forest cover, this is not good for the entire world economy. Deforestation, this again it is a continuous phenomena, and it's the graph I am showing here. There are not only Brazil, there are other countries also which have been witnessing this phenomena called deforestation for the past 30 years. So on the one hand, you are burning fossil fuels and generating more and more carbon dioxide. On the other hand, you are also cutting your trees, you are also losing your forest cover. So you can understand what is going to happen. So I talked about this ozone layer depletion. So this particular graph shows you, So if there is no restriction on ozone layer depletion, then you will have this red color graph which is showing that excess skin cancer, the people will get affected with excess skin cancer. But thankfully we have this Montreal Protocol, we have this Copenhagen Amendment which actually worked in our favor, and we could actually address this issue of ozone layer depletion. That's why if you remember the graph, the previous graph where I've discussed about ozone layer depletion, that graph had a downward trend also. Why that had a downward trend? Because of all these rules and regulation. But had this rules and regulation was not being in the place, then we would have had this high amount of skin cancer patients in this world. Now the question I'm going to ask here, do you think are all the countries at the same risk level? What would be your idea? Because till now we have been talking about the world trend, everything we have presented in terms of what is happening at the world level. But what is your idea? Because I have also introduced the concept called developing countries and developed countries. Do you think all the countries will be at the same risk level, or we have some variations? To the answer. Here in this particular slide I am presenting that fossil fuel consumption per capita. This is 2021 data. As you can see, United States, which is like part of the developed countries. So United States fossil fuel per capita consumption is quite high. In fact, it's the highest. Now, where is India? India's fossil fuel consumption is very low compared to United States. Not only United States, but compared to the other countries. But here we are just focusing on United States and India, because India represents the, let's say, developing countries. This is per capita carbon dioxide emissions. So first let us focus on the level of the per capita carbon dioxide emissions of United States and India. India is like, it started rising since 1950s, but still it's very, very small if you're comparing with United States. United States is level is quite high, but the overall trend United States is declining, and India is showing slightly increasing trend, especially post 2000. Second is per capita greenhouse gas emissions. Again, if you compare the level, United States is quite high, India is way below United States. But again, the trend for United States is slightly going down, and India had a stagnant trend, but it is rising to, since 2010-15 onwards. So this graph is presenting the annual share of global carbon dioxide emissions. As you can see that United States share would be high compared to India, but over the time United States share had gone down while India's share is going up. So this is in terms of fossil fuels consumption, in terms of greenhouse gas emission. Now let us come to the impact. What is the impact? This graph presents the absolute number of deaths from ambient particulate air pollution, and this is between 1990 to 2015. You can see that India is way above United States, and it is increasing. The absolute number of death is increasing in India, whereas United States absolute number of death is way below than India, and it is going down also. So this is on the left hand side we have USA, and on the right hand side we have India. If you compare the level, just focus on the y-axis, compare the level, India's level is quite high compared to United States. However, United States is showing everything is going down. The air pollution is going down, outdoor particulate matter, that is also going down. These are all death rate. These are also going down. Outdoor ozone pollution death rate, because of that is also going down. For India also we are observing death is going down, but in terms of level, obviously India is way ahead of United States. But outdoor particulate matter, the death, because of that, it is increasing in India. So this is very current data. Now the question is, we are towards the end of the discussion. Now the question is, what is happening in developing countries? The effect is quite severe. Even if they are not emitting that much of greenhouse gas, even if they are not using that much of fossil fuel, but the impact and the impact in terms of death is quite high in developing countries, right? That's what the last segment of this lecture or the graph or the data is showing us. Now, what are the take home points from this particular lecture? So first we started with the idea of development. We have witnessed that how the world GDP had increased over the time. We have seen there are countries which are developed whose per capita GDP was quite high compared to developing countries. We have also seen that since we had development, we had this per capita GDP growth, we have used lots of fossil fuels, we have generated lots of carbon dioxide, and that had directly impacted human health in terms of air pollution, in terms of let's say sea level rise, etc., in terms of global warming as well. And towards the end of the this discussion, we got this understanding that even if developed countries have generated much more greenhouse gas, but the impact is severe on the developing countries. So what is the way forward? We need to think, obviously we need to think about some policies and stuff that we will be taking up in the next lecture. So today is this much. Thank you.